What's next for IT? In today's economy, technology touches every aspect of the day-to-day operations of business. There has never been more pressure on IT to deliver for our organizations. So what can we expect over the next decade? We need to think differently about how we approach our work to continue to thrive into the future. This requires all of us to be intentional in how we look at our role going forward. Smart IT is an approach to getting the important things done by transforming the way we think, work, and lead. And now, let's disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk the smart IT way. Everyone, welcome to the Smart IT Podcast. And this will be part 2 of our episode with my conversation with Prachee. We're talking about cyber, we're talking about thinking, we're talking about design thinking, and some other very interesting, cool things. So Prachee, welcome back again for part 2 of our series.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to go back a little bit and just talk a little bit about some of this magic I think we talked about before, where you can go into that room, you set the table, and you get a lot of different people with different personas and inputs and perspectives. And then somehow there's some magic being happening where all of a sudden everyone gets a better appreciation for the topic at hand, the scope of the conversation. In our case, a lot of times we're talking IT, we're talking cybersecurity programs, managing risk.
Yeah.
I know you do a lot of work with clients, and you kind of see that sparkle in their eyes, I can almost say, right? Where now all of a sudden different people with different job titles are saying, oh, I'm starting seeing a different perspective on how this actually works in our organization with our different teams, with our customers. So let's kind of pick up from that perspective right there.
Sure. Yeah. So, you said something about appreciation. I think the appreciation comes from awareness, and it's not anything. We're not reinventing something, or we're not creating something that didn't exist before. These people came with all the knowledge, right? So the idea of bringing their whole self to that problem, to that conversation, is what really creates the magic, right? And in cybersecurity, especially, we're so trained to be specialists in our areas, right? In our technical fields, in our roles, where we sit in the verticals, in our departments. And pretty much, even in my own experience working as a cybersecurity professional earlier, it was really around, we just put those blinders on and are bringing that. And sometimes, the intensity of the conversation, what's at stake, all of that, many times prohibits us from bringing the whole self and actually saying, hey, how can I look at it from a different way, right? So what we do is create a safe space in those conversations where people are literally, it's okay to throw darts at the board, right? And it's not just a fun exercise, but it's really about engaging your left and right brain together. And then really inviting people's experiences, right? What if somebody is a music coach? What if someone else was a player, right? As Brian, my partner in the firm, he talks about, right? You've got different coaches for different positions and plays, in a game, right? And this is oversimplifying it, but similarly, for different positions, different roles, different types of intensity level that you're dealing with at an executive level, at a middle management level, or at, a junior analyst level, and your experience that you're bringing into the company, right? All of that is tremendously valuable to solving the problem at hand. And we have done this in other areas of life. We just are not trained to do that in cybersecurity. It's just somehow that switch goes off and it's a matter of turning the switch on, right? And the moment people are like, oh, I can totally look at it this way. It doesn't matter if I'm a risk assessor. It doesn't matter if I'm, a pen test person or whatever else role they may have. Starts to come in together, looking at it and looking at it from a whole big picture perspective, the detail level at a lower level as well as the big picture. That's where the magic starts to happen, and it's very exciting to see that. And even when I work as a coach personally to a lot of cyber professionals, as they're planning, how to tackle problems or how to structure their teams well, in order to work in the best, most efficient and optimal way. Sometimes the most efficient is not optimal for the people, even though the process is efficient. I think it's striking a balance of both. we had talked about stress and burnout in a prior conversation, and how much pressure there is on cybersecurity professionals. So really coming in, really figuring out what that optimal balance for the teams are. And again, as a skill set, this is not taught to a cyber professional, right? We learn governance, we learn team management, we learn certain things, but it's very broad based.
Yeah, that's some great points there. And I noticed the other thing is that perspective of cyber mean kind of like no, as opposed to informing, right? The business want to go do
Sure.
something, reduce
Yeah.
customer churn, acquire more customers,
Yeah.
expand. And they're looking over, okay, now cyber person, what are you going to tell me I can't do, right? And I think that shift in
Yeah.
perspective is we're going to have brakes on the car, right? So you can go faster. We're going to have these safety checks on the airline so we can take off the airplane, get to where you go safely. So I think let's talk a little bit about, thinking about this system of it's not no. We want you to do what you need to do. We're just giving you some guardrails, suggestions. We look around at other fields.
Yes.
It's a help as opposed to very restrictive. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Right. Right. And unfortunately, cybersecurity people, for the most part, tend to be labeled as naysayers. I mean, because we're raising the questions, we are raising the risk equation or the risk quotient, if I may, to a conversation, right? And not to say other types of risk management are not in place. Cybersecurity kind of, again, like gets caught in between this, right? It's not quite financial risk. It's not quite physical risk, but it's a blend of both, right? I mean, both repercussions are there. And what has happened is, innovation can be sorted because it's like, okay, immediately we say, no, it's not secure, as opposed to how can we do this, right? And so our mission really is, how can cybersecurity people be the accelerants to innovation, right? As opposed to the brakes.
I love that.
Right. And so we think of, and it's not like you're directly the accelerator pedal, but you're that additive that really, or the catalyzing or the galvanizer into companies propelling forward into their strategy, right? So how can we take this, make it safe and secure, not just for our customers, but for the employees within the firm as well, right? And larger society in general. And from a cyber standpoint, it really begs then at getting that customer mindset at two levels. Within an organization, a company, the cyber department has its internal stakeholders as customers, right? I mean, we know, IT as a service, software as, all of that is there. But cybersecurity in general, like we said, is a lot of policies, it's a lot of, controls, it's a lot of, all of those things. But if we start to look at our internal stakeholders equal to our external customers, right, the mindset shifts. And then they have to think about also the external customers, to your point, like, hey, we want to expand in Japan, we want to expand in wherever else, South Asia, Latin America. What does that look like, from a people, process and technology standpoint? And how can cybersecurity be an accelerant here? Hey, here's what we can do 2-3 different ways that can then propel us forward, as opposed to be like, nope, it's not secure, let's not do this. It's all kinds of issues, right?
And it seemed like if everybody kind of looked at it as the design aspect almost as well, right? So we talk about design thinking is you'll never go in officially as an organization and not include like quality and safety and security. So we shouldn't be considered as a bolt on anyway. So it's like my expectation is here's a new business initiative. Here's a new technology going to support it. Here are all the things to make sure it's safe. We can manage it. We can maintain it. And we don't get less secure because we're doing something. So it almost seems like to be natural.
Right.
So is this something that we may need to do more education on the business side of the house that say security is an element when we design these processes and initiatives and these capabilities?
Yeah. And it's not just even for new business initiatives, right? Design thinking as that concept can be applied to anywhere, right? Where are you today in an organization? How can we shift our perspective and start to add value today, right? It's not just, hey, we want to expand in another country, or I want to embark on a new IT initiative, a new artificial intelligence initiative, cloud migration, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be something new. You can literally start saying, how can I use design thinking principles to make the experience of our own people better, right? So big focus of ours is how to make the experience of cybersecurity professionals in a cybersecurity organization better, so that they can deliver that value to the internal stakeholders and the external customers. For us, all of them are customers, right? So just putting that hat on and starting to see, how to apply those tricks of the trade, design thinking, to really improve the experience now and today, right? So there's a short term, immediate, and then there's also that long term perspective, right? And that point just slipped out of my head, or flew out, but it'll come back to me. But it's really about people's experience in cybersecurity, right? That's a huge one, because I mean, if you're stressed out, burnt out, working through all of that pressure, I mean, the outcomes, yes, you can work only so much, and after that, it's just going to start tanking, right? So it's really about leveraging design thinking to help internally as well as externally.
I noticed you also, some of your material on your site, I know you guys mentioned a lot about this industrial design thinking.
Yes.
You want to talk a
Yes.
little bit about that? Let the audience knows, like.
Sure. Yeah. Industrial strength design thinking. So for your audience, those of who have never heard it before, is a term that was coined by Brian, but really inspired by the, industrial history of his area of Michigan, where he's from. Eventually, like, the all the big problems, or all the big sort of products, large scale industrial. So think car manufacturing, think refrigeration, right? Think big scale aviation. What do you call it? Production lines, right? So think about it as that expansive, industrial level design thinking. You're not just creating a small product, but you're thinking about assembly lines. You're thinking about, high volume, high throughput design processes and designing products. That's the industrial strength design thinking. So applying that level of scale and complexity of a problem to solve problems in cybersecurity. So the term was coined by Brian, called industrial strength design thinking. That's what we're taking and expanding on and really applying to cybersecurity. Because if you look at it, and I think we talked about it in the last episode too, was cybersecurity is really a complex system. Right? When you start to look at all these, it's like a plane, right? It's really an adaptive system, and it's operating in an environment that itself is shifting like the weather, right? So when a plane, and I'm using that as an analogy, it's easy to understand. When a plane is flying in the air, not only is its own complex system, now it's interacting with multiple different types of systems that are, around it, right? You have the ground information, you have, the plane's own information going on, and then the weather system that's operating around it, right? What's in place and what's coming down, the route. And so cybersecurity, if you start to look at it, is the same. It's the same sort of setup, right? And that's why when we say industrial strength design thinking, we're actually bringing in components of critical thinking, systems thinking, and the core design thinking principles to really create that cohesive, approach to solving large scale complex problems. Right. And immediately when you start to look at cybersecurity as a complex system, you can then start to apply systems principles. And many of the people, on your call who'd be systems thinkers, you immediately get it, right? If I'm looking at I'm not looking at it as a static process, but I'm really looking at it as a dynamic thing, right? There's threat actors, there's all these processes going on, right? I have my entire IT environment I'm looking at, right? And all the other external environmental factors that can impact my system. Now it really starts to behave like, in systems world or terminology, it's called a complex adaptive system. Start looking at those principles, start solving the problem from that perspective, I'm sorry. So then it starts to get really interesting. So it's industrial strength design thinking. This is our own way of applying problem solving, combining critical thinking, systems thinking, and design thinking principles to cybersecurity.
That's fantastic. Because when I started to think about that, and then say a CISO think about, man, I've been on this job for 3 years, and I see the exact same issues and symptoms and pain points. They can step back and start to think, maybe this is a part of a system that I don't understand. So talk about that from that problem solving, seeing symptoms over and over again. And maybe there's a feedback loop that's happening that they're unaware of. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think that was the inspiration behind the work Brian and I also, the genesis of our work really was that, because when he and I started talking about our individual experiences, working with different people and in our own roles, all of our problems are pretty much
Yeah.
similar. So we're going, okay, so if you're having pretty much the same problems, I'm having pretty much the same problems. Like I mean, tech environments, yes, to a large extent are different, but they're also very similar, right? So the problems are similar. The way we were approaching the problems or people were thinking about the problems were similar. The outcomes are similar and the
Yes.
symptoms are similar.
Yeah.
Right. And then we started talking to other people, so think about it, like other industry verticals. I mean, it was the healthcare, it was financial services. We went to some CISO summits, right? We had some conversations and they're like, nope, we have the same issues. And across the board, this whole sort of, I call it a pandemic of stress and burnout within cybersecurity professionals, right? Globally, is impacting everybody. So it doesn't matter if it's a professional sitting out in Asia or Europe or, or Latin America. Most of their experience in CISOs right now are saying my personal risk is, higher than my organizational cyber risk, right? Because of all the pressure and the scrutiny that is there on cybersecurity. And not to say that that's
Yeah.
there are other professions that have that kind of pressure, but they also have solutions that have been brought into them. What we are saying is there are solutions out there. If you start to liken it to other, areas or other industry kind of problems that have been solved before, you can port those methods. You can port those approaches into cybersecurity, test and apply them, and configure them and customize them for your company and see what works, right? But there are solved problems. All of these issues we're hearing about in cyber, for a large extent, have been mimicking problems in other big industries, right? Think medical team training, think aviation, as we talked about in the last episode, right? When you start to look at it like that, you can be like, okay,
Yes.
I can apply some of these ideas into here, and those are some very quick wins, sort of approaches that can be easily used by leaders in the industry.
So it sounds like this is a great place to insert potential new skill sets for CISOs and other leaders,
Sure, yeah,
bringing in resources like you guys, like the work you and Brian are doing, where CISOs don't have that much experience, maybe in systems thinking, design thinking, maybe they're struggling, or they've been
yeah.
looking at the traditional frameworks just inside of cybersecurity. Let's talk about
Yes,
this.
yes.
Yeah.
And many of them do. We've been doing it in other areas of our life. That's exactly what we're saying. If you were a coach, if you're a cook, you already use systems thinking, right? You're thinking about one thing affects another. How do I scale it? How do I, put steps together, right? How do I approach people? So to a large extent, you do it. We're just not aware. And once people start becoming aware, they kind of sort of know what we're talking about. The moment we start to
Yep.
talk about in the context of their work, that's when things start to click and it starts to become like a beautiful symphony. They're
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I
Yeah.
just got it. And so yeah, you're adding new skills, you're honing skills you may already have, and you may not even be aware that you were using them. And that's just like the greatest gift and contribution for us to provide to them,
So
right?
kind of like at the gym, and you're noticing you've been there for 6 months. You've been doing the routine yourself, not seeing the results, and then the personal coach walks by and notices, hey, by the way, it might be a different way to actually use this machine for you doing it. And by the way, can I see your entire routine?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's like an external, little coach, not little coach, but coach saying,
Yes.
what, on the shoulder saying,
Yeah.
hey, you might be some tweaks here.
And then
Boom.
boom.
And
Yep.
by the way,
Yep.
this is also related to what you eat. By the way, let's take a look at what your diet looks like, how much sleep. Next, you're inside this system of human
Yes.
body and conditioning. So it's like that could also be applied, right,
Yes.
for in our tech space here as well.
Yes. Yes. And workout is a great example because it's not just people who end up there, like you're saying, the little tweaks that are required, but a lot of times people are there, A, they don't know what to do, and B, they can't see themselves right at that end product. They don't even know what to expect at the end, or can they do it, right? So sometimes we're going through the motion, not knowing what to expect. And so there's many different things, right? Sometimes you're there and you could be
Yes.
self-sabotaging in some way, right? So that's where a lot of the mindset personal coaching piece also comes in. So while we do work with large teams as well, working with people one-on-one or in smaller groups also helps. Like, you go work with a team manager and bunch of direct reports. We've done that as well. And so that also helps when it's a collective as well as an individual, improvement, if I may, development. But then the whole idea is to be able to leverage our collective intelligence, right? Our individual collective intelligence, the creative, the analytical, our past, our present, all of our experiences, and then the collective intelligence on the team. So every person can become a contribution while they're being specialists, right? Because I always say cybersecurity is, a very complex discipline full of disparate experts who then don't know how to
Yes.
work with each other all the time. Part of it is because the specialty itself limits us, because then it prevents us from seeing it from another person's perspective, right? In connecting the dots in context in that situation at hand, right? It's easy to connect dots in hindsight, but while you're there sitting and working with different people, doing that almost live is a skill set, and that is also something we help with and find it very, very beneficial.
The other thing I know you work with a lot is trying to help the introverts, right? So we're talking about going from the
Yes.
individuals to the teams. Now we're in the room. We got these
Yes.
different skill sets. We're working
Yes.
on it, but not all voices are equal. There's some people who are quiet, like, that's a lot of talent over there. So, I mean, what happens if 40,
Yes.
50, 60, or 70% of the people in the room aren't really expressing themselves or bringing their entire selves to it? Let's talk
Yeah.
about the introverts and how do we get more participation out of them to,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm telling you, the introvert thing kind of almost was a gift that came to me, right? When I started talking to people, they're like, "Oh, I don't do this. I'm an introvert," right? And then I met a few people otherwise like, "I'm an introvert." And I started bumping into people who call themselves or identified themselves as introverts everywhere. I'm going, "All right, this is looks like something to dig into and look into." And anecdotally, right, we're going to do our survey soon, but anecdotally, pretty much 80% of the people I talk to say they're introverts, right? And many of them it wasn't like they were born with it or they were like children. And through the pandemic, many people started to call themselves introverts as well, right? So it was kind of like almost acquired because of the lockdown, because you were sort of restricted, right? And many of us, and I say that myself because I discovered I'm an ambivert. I like my alone time as much as I like my social time, right? I'm a pretty extrovert person, but I then realized, okay, I kind of like my own thinking time, my own problem solving time. So as people were assimilating back, when the restrictions were lifted, some people really struggled with it, some people loved it, right? But a big aspect of what people are attributing that to was their introvertedness, either acquired or something that became magnified through COVID, right? So I'm just using that as a reference point to explain sort of what I have seen and observed and experienced in the last few years. And because of that label of introvertedness, so what happens is the moment you identify as an introvert, you absorb and then start to embody and then start to behave, right? That's how you start showing up based on how the word introvert is defined.
yeah.
Right? Nowhere in the introverted definition is the lack of intelligence, lack of good ideas, lack of participation, right? All of that is not a general definition of introvertedness. But what we have done is we take that, we extrapolate it, and we tend to assume, so, oh, I'm an introvert, so XYZ, right? So, and automatically what happens is you become what you think about all the time, right? And if you're like, okay, I don't have anything, so it's not, step back. It's not so much that you don't have ideas. You think, because you're an introvert, you're like, I don't have anything to say, or I don't want to say, becomes I don't have anything to
Oh,
say.
interesting. Okay. The slight
You see what
difference.
I'm saying? Like some subconsciously it becomes a thing because you don't speak up, and then you're like, okay, and then you feel like you didn't add anything. So it becomes like a negative feedback loop, right? And when you start to challenge that and be like, no, sit there, right? And it's not about forcing yourself to talk. That's what I tell people. You can network, you can make an impact without truly changing your personality, because the word introvert is a label.
Uh,
Right. Tomorrow, if you start telling yourself you're an extrovert, I guarantee an introvert may start to
yeah.
imbibe qualities of an extrovert without even knowing. And it's not about speaking affirmations, but it's truly observing how you're showing up because of that label. And you may or may not be like that, right? So we almost force ourselves to become that person that we're not, because of the labels and the connotations that were assigned to it.
So,
Does that
It
resonate?
does.
It's pretty, I don't know, it's a pretty deep topic when you start to talk about it, but in coaching sessions, it really starts to unravel, right? They're like, okay, I don't like networking. So what aspect of networking
Yeah.
do you know? I'm an introvert. I don't like networking, right? And so, okay, so it's automatic because we think introvert and networking are two
Correct.
opposite sides of the coin. Can't gel. That's not true, right? If you make us, it's not that you can't talk, not that you are not a good social talker, right? I've met some very impressive introverted people. They tend to, there's many different ways of explaining that. Some people tend to, like their solitude, they're contemplative, right? There are all these different characteristics. Doesn't mean you're all, and doesn't mean you're just a little bit. We are very complex beings. You have to see it in the multitude of you as a person. So same thing, as specialists, we put a blinder on. So it's almost like calling yourself
Yeah.
a specialist in terms of, social interaction or whatever behaviors. You put the blinder on and you don't see yourself as anything else.
Well, it's interesting. On that whole thing of the networking, not being good at a networking event, you can almost think of like, I had some guests on before to talk about designing conversations, designing meetings, designing
Sure.
interactions. So like you said, so maybe it's not that they
Yes.
don't have any ideals or they don't like the network. Maybe they need an icebreaker. Maybe somebody can structure the networking event to have icebreakers to get
Yes.
that person comfortable just to get started, right? And then once they get started, then they may just keep on going like, man, this person won't stop talking, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
it's, go
It
ahead.
is. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
it's an
Finish your thought.
opportunity to structure how our teams are meeting, how they're interacting, finding out, okay, where am I not getting this full person? Because if I can get more of the individual to come out into their full self and I multiply this, then the outcomes of the team will be better. The outcomes of IT, technology, the outcomes of the business, really outcome of any human
Yep.
interaction can actually potentially get better,
Yes.
right?
Yes, yes, and the type and extent and the type and the time or the duration of the interaction shifts based on the person and the context of a situation, right? So here's an easy free tip I'm going to give to all your audience. I call it the 10-20-30 method, right? If you are, let's say, establishing a relationship with somebody in a networking
Yeah.
session, right? Or you go to a happy hour or you go to a conference, or let's say you're simply trying to establish a relationship with a new CISO who's joined your organization, for example, right? Could be many
Mm-hmm.
different settings, right? But this method can be applied to everywhere where you're trying to establish a new connection. First time you go talk to someone, talk to them only for 10 minutes, right? Have you seen in happy hours when one person just like sticks
Yes.
to one person and just talks to them? Or like if there's one leader who walked in and everybody kind of just surrounds him and there's that one person who
Right.
never moves, right? So, and you basically trying to extract your entire life history and establish a
Yeah.
lifetime relationship in that happy hour time. So that may not be the best approach for everyone. Typically, it doesn't work, right? You want to be able, so 10 minutes, let's say you're an introvert and it really affects you in terms of how long you can talk, all those things, or you're just apprehensive of talking to strangers or people you don't know. Um, 10 minutes for the first conversation. Hi, how are you?
Yeah.
Some tells me something about yourself. Ask more about the other people. Be really interested in knowing someone. So maybe it's to spend 10 minutes and say, hey, if there's a spark, if I may, it's almost
Yeah.
like dating, right? If you set that connection, you tell the person, hey, I would love to follow up with you, right, at work or afterwards. Can I set up a 20-minute conversation? It's not 15,
Right.
it's not 30, 20 minutes, and say, would love to take this forward and see how we can support each other in our growth, right? And one other thing people do in networking, they think is because it's a take, it feels fake
Right.
to people, right? Because I'm having shallow conversations. That's mostly because we don't think it as a giving and receiving conversation, right? When you're establishing a professional connection, people know you're coming to them for something. So you can already walk in and say, what value
Yeah.
can you add to them? And it doesn't have to be in that immediate moment. It's not like, hey, I'm giving you a $10 bill and give me a piece of cake, right? It can happen at a
Yeah.
later date. Go there with the intention. So anytime you're connecting with someone, walk in there thinking you're not taking something because networking is fake or shallow or whatever. It will be a give and take, not necessarily spontaneous. It can be asynchronous, right? Or at a different time. And then take it further, right? So the second conversation can be 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then the follow on conversations can be 30 minutes or more,
I like that.
right? Then you actually know what that person is looking for, what you want out of that person, right? Especially if it is somebody senior, honoring their time is the best gift you can give them. Because these days it's not money, it's time that is more important, right? For people, and time and money. Let me not say or money, but time is critical for people these days, right? And so if you're walking in and saying, okay, I need your help, or I need your insights and guidance for so and so, you know, it'd be valuable to me, right? And that's all you have to say. That's it. And that's the
Right.
truth. Part of what happens is we try to beat
Right.
around the bush. No, everybody in a professional connection, if this person has made it to senior management, they have done the same networking, sort of practices we're learning, right? And they know when somebody is trying to get their guidance, it's probably for professional, growth, professional advancement, right? So they know that, and people like to help people. So give them an opportunity to help you. We always love to help people, right? So it's the same thing. Allow them to help you, but you have to guide them to say, okay, what is it that you want to go talk to? If you're going to talk to a CIO, what particular things do you want to ask them? Right? What guidance would you need for your job or some sort of, career growth, next promotion? The clarity itself helps, and the honesty
That's
helps.
very cool. Yeah.
And then you can say at the end of the conversation saying, these are my skill sets. If there's anything I can offer you now or in the future, or a project that you're working on, or I can connect you with somebody, please let me know. Right? And that is easy. I have done that, and that has served me very well, served my clients very well. But this 10-20-30 method is very simple, and takes the pressure off, and you can be honest and genuine about it, right? It's when you don't have a proper plan or an intention
Yes.
going in, right? And you again walking in with a bias, it's almost an implicit bias against networking, that networking is bad and it's selfish or it's manipulative somehow. It isn't. That's how we grow. We're a society. It's about establishing, knowing how to do connections and
I
contribution.
love that.
Right. So think about it like
There's
that.
a lot of opportunity there, right? We could just change the regular hour and a half we think we're going to waste, right? Drink a couple of drinks, not really
Yeah.
meeting about it. Not use,
Yeah.
we can actually shift that, turn it
Yeah.
around. And at the end of the day, everybody in the room has something to provide, right?
Yes,
And like you,
absolutely.
and then
Absolutely.
making everyone comfortable with
Go ahead.
asking or interacting in a way that allows that to come out. Seems like something that we can all jump on and
Yes.
say, how can we can do better at this? As opposed to, like you said, locked in a
Yeah.
mindset. I'm about to go to a status meeting. It's like, well, there's no law to say the status meeting has to be boring and knowledge sharing. Not, you can change that dynamic, right? What can you provide? What can I
Yes.
provide?
Yes.
What can we share? And at the end of the day,
Yes.
there's somebody in the room who's gone through what you've gone through, but they don't know
Yes.
necessarily that you need that guidance. So they need some way to connect.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, again, you, as an introvert, you can be a manager of introverts, or you could be, an ambivert or an extroverted person who is on a team as a team leader, right? And then so you should know how to harness that to give, in some companies, as a practice, they invite some, the introverts either to send in their written, suggestions, or sometimes they're invited to speak first. But it's still required, no matter how much everybody external to you can support or create an environment for you to contribute, it's the willingness to contribute, no matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert, right? Or even establishing connection in networking.
That's powerful. And it also starts to lead back once we begin to this systems thinking. So that's like thinking about the system of interacting in that network event,
Yeah.
interacting in the
Yeah.
meeting. And if we're starting to think about something simple, like what's one of the things like end user complain about? Oh, this system is too hard to use. IT made it hard. And the
Yes.
security made me click a
Yes.
couple extra buttons, put a long code in, and
Yes.
I don't understand why they're so evil and doing this. On the other
Yes.
side, the
Yes.
cyber tech, man, these guys, what's wrong with these users? But once they're in the same room and
Yeah.
change the perspective,
It's
right?
blame game.
It's not that
Yeah.
we don't like security.
Yeah.
It's that the way it's done or my understanding makes it seem cumbersome. So maybe if I understood the perspective,
Sure.
I would appreciate it
Yeah.
more. And then on the other side, maybe it's like, oh, now I understand. You have to log in 4 times and you're trying to help this customer. Maybe there's another way I can use the technology. Maybe I can configure it differently. Maybe I can alter the process.
It's not just for end
Yes.
users though. Think
Yeah.
about it, right? That's what I was talking about. Internally, if the cyber team itself thinks outside the box to make their life simpler, then it's easier to think about making your end user life simpler.
And they need to,
Does that make sense? Like when we were talking about improving the experience of cyber professionals, right? If you're used to being in a cumbersome environment, anything that is easy and fun will actually feel weird. Sometimes feeling bad feels better than feeling good. Because that's what you're acclimated to.
And we may not know what the perspective of the business user is. We just assume they're sitting here in front of the keyboard. They can click 1, 2, 3, 4, log in. But when we don't realize they're actually in the car, or they actually have a paper clip in their hand talking to a patient. And we, in those perspectives, we may not have that. So it's like, if we understand how it actually works by talking.
Because even within cyber departments, we're using 50 softwares that don't talk to each other. That's my point. Like if you could think about making your life simpler, then the idea of making your end user life simpler, instead of playing a blame game or saying you clicking on too many phishing links, versus asking a question saying, well, why not let our end users click on links all day long? What can we do? To just remove that sort of risk, right? So then it becomes, okay, we're not training them enough. But sometimes what if we have 4-year-olds or even 1-year-olds playing with phones now, and 95-year-old people who are playing with phones now, right? And you send them a link, they click. How many end user trainings are you going to do? It's not even just corporate security. This is societal security we're talking about, right? Our friends, our family, are the elders in our society and the young kids in our society. There's so much digital penetration. It's just a simple thing is clicking, but even within an organization, if they think about it, right, saying, oh, end user, and it becomes punitive, right? You send them to, trainings. The next time again, if you click on something, all right, fine, your compensation gets affected or something, right? Your bonus or whatever it is. But then it becomes an us versus them game. Right, so part of it is, fix your house also while you're trying to tell somebody else how to do that better. So yes, how can we simplify the complexity in our cyber departments, in the way we do things, in the way, like I talked about, my stoplight analogy, right? Green is where all the focus is, the threats and and where the money is going, right? The software purchases. The red is where the methods are, right? We're not looking at how are we organizing ourselves? How are we even operating? I gave the example of a pilot and cognitive load. How are we dealing with the well-being of our employees? And then the amber light in the middle of that stoplight is where the people getting squished between this red and green. Right. And so obviously in burnout and stress, you're trying to look for ways. I mean, I'm not saying completely get rid of that, but there are better ways to deal with the same problem by looking at it different ways, putting on those perspectives, expanding the aperture through which we're, solving these problems, bring in that industrial strength design thinking perspective, right? We're there to teach you. And also look at the individual personalities of the people who are on the ground and working. So many different levels you're tackling, right? That's where the personal coaching, the introvert angle comes in, trying to work on it, right? Would you buy, seriously, on an average, a mid-sized to large company, anywhere from 50 to 200 plus vendors they're dealing with at any time. Right now you've got third-party risk going on, so that's a whole different complex conversation. But can we simplify some of this?
And I think some of the opportunity for simplification comes into understanding the system. In this case, understanding how the attackers work. And obviously, we have like the kill chain, right? Or attack chain. So let me take some of the friction off this end user training, because I'm gonna catch some of these attackers' activity with some other controls, so I can ease up and adjust controls, adjust process to make sure one, less friction as possible for users, so they can do their business and make money, right? And pay our bill and pay our paychecks, right? That's the whole purpose. So sometimes people forget.
And because if you look at it, in all the root cause analysis that happen in most of the, the biggest breaches that make news, most of it, once they get into an organization, most of their MO is the same. It's how they get in is changing. But the idea that, yes, they are getting in and doing that, it's pretty common. Like, which one was the one was it Australia or New Zealand? I forgot, like last year or something, was a big one. And it was a telecom company, I think. I'm speaking from memory, but anyway, so the company PR team said, "Oh, it was a very sophisticated attack," and versus one of the government side officials said, "No, it wasn't." Right? So it's just become this thing. So what is the truth?
Especially if some of the gaps identified after the incident were the standard stuff like
cyber hygiene, simple. Just
we didn't know what the data was. We didn't classify it. Okay, if you said that in the first year, why is year 4 of your security program are you still talking about the exact same thing? So
in what really matters, right? I mean, a person comes in, sure, can they get
Yes.
out? And can they get out with
Right.
their data, right? Okay. So it's the same thing. What other, we tend to think software solutions, we're not thinking of it from a whole process standpoint, right? What is it? That's the whole point. What is it in my organization that I need to look at? Right? And a lot of this approach of controls has become, ported over from financial accounting controls long time by compliance driven checks, which are lag measures. Again, it's about, do you have a checklist for XYZ? Have you done X? That is not an active, there's,
Yeah.
prevention, intrusion, stuff like that. That is there. But again, when you're starting to report on, you start to monitor, it becomes more of a lag measure than an active sort of. Think about it as looking at a United Airlines dashboard, right? They know everything at
Yeah.
any point what's going on. The plane is operating independently, but it's also in the in the entire airline system, right? There's at any point maybe 200 planes in the air, right? So think about it like that. If you can look at your cyber organization in that way as a complex adaptive system, things, you start to look at different ways where you can address this issue, right? And Brian's favorite example is Ocean's 11, right?
Yes.
You watch any
Yes.
heist movie, right? Think about any heist movies. I mean, the original Ocean's 11, which I
Yeah.
learned about recently, was in the
Yeah.
60s, I think, with
Yes.
Sinatra in it. And that was the time when they were trying to break into the casino, right? And they did. But isn't it similar? More complicated, sure, right? But it's about the mindset. And again, can you outthink your enemies at that point because you know your organization better? Yes, there's massive amounts of, nefarious actors out there, but I think us looking at, I mean, I say us, I'm really talking about us cyber professionals, right? In our organizations to say, okay, how do I look at this from a big picture perspective?
Hello.
Right, and not just try to adapt to frameworks or adapt controls and stuff. We do something called the controls chain of fitness. Also, we actually put the controls through this sort of filtering process to say, okay, is this control really beneficial and helping me? And some of them are not, and some of them are regulatory driven. You have to do them, but really look at which controls are actually the ones who are
Yeah.
preventing or even helping me do out of the 5,000 controls I have in my organization. You go through your library, whatever that is, right, over a period of 1 or 2 workshops. You go through all of them collectively as a team and you start to really look at the efficacy. Light bulbs open, right? And this is how much cost that goes into managing these controls, right? Some of them are compliance focused, some of them are automated controls, right? Think about an automated controls, right? It's like certain I know
Yeah.
valves and stuff that let the pressure out so something doesn't explode, right? Those are automated controls. By and large, now we're seeing them by way of software in cybersecurity, but that thinking is still not as robust as it can be,
So this is
right? Or
yeah.
heating, yeah,
Yeah.
heating sensors in data centers, whatever that is, right? Those are automated controls that are in place. What are some of those things that we can do and start to look at our control framework in an organization and start to look at those? There could be certain ones that you could retire because they're really not playing any role. And some of them could truly be checklists from a regulatory standpoint, some other, sort of compliance standpoint. But then there's ones that are actually helping the organization stay secure.
It's fantastic. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I call these mind
yeah.
blowing, moments. Uh, because yeah, you're taking what you have, like I said, and you're making immediate impact, and that's really important from a people standpoint, a process standpoint, and technology standpoint, right? And if you're in a position as a CISO to return money out of your budget back to the
Yes.
business so they can reinvest it in a company's growth, would you not do it?
Yes.
Right now, you're a business
Yes.
enabler, right? You're not the department that's siphoning money from the salespeople who are actually bringing in revenue, right? And having a P&L impact versus cyber, which is a function. That's what I say. Start putting on the business hats and see they're not just your business users who are using applications. These are the people that are making the company run. How can I enable that,
Yeah.
right? So if you've gotten $20 million this year, let's say, okay, I don't need 3 million of this. Here you go. Now, would you not come out up on the
Oh,
top
definitely.
there? It's a mindset
You can make a
change.
CFO very, very
It's
happy.
always there.
Right? They would think you're crazy, right? They check the calendar to see if it's April Fool's Day. And so I think the CISO just came up to me and said, I
Sure.
don't need as much
Yeah.
as I need to use it for other business purposes.
Yeah.
That's just
Yeah.
next level.
Yeah. And that money, where you find that from, it's not because you were cutting short on your security, it's because the implementation was poor and you were actually bleeding money, because a lot of times the practices you were using was what was eating up the money, not the cost of the software or the product itself.
Pretty powerful. So
right? And so that's like a basic, CFO hat on, budget management hat on, right? Because again, we're not trained to think like that. You got 20 million, you set aside some capital, you set aside some software, right? You have your resource headcount. If you start to really look at it saying, okay, what amongst this is we really need? I mean, I have personally seen 3.5 projects taking 3.5, 4 years for tools to implement in large organizations because of that lack of that skill set or that thinking to say, okay, we as cybersecurity want it done one way, right? It may or may not be conducive for your environment. Your users may hate it, whatever that is. It took 2.5, 3 years. By that time, the technology is obsolete. Your people hate it, right? And at that point, you have to declare sunk cost and go look for another, solution. And by then, you spend $600,000-$700,000, because you think about it from an annual budget standpoint. If you look at it from a roadmap standpoint, you can really start to find money. So we also, like I'd say, I'm also like a financial advisor to CISOs to say, come, let's talk about your budget, how you're thinking of investing it, which areas, what do you really need it, and how are you communicating back to business? And what are your opportunities to actually reduce your budget in an environment where people actually double the funding, like in big banks, other big companies, there's a breach, you drop in another 100 million. There's a second breach, you drop in, right? But then there's no correlation there.
So Prachee, somebody's
right, but that really puts you in a powerful position.
Very powerful. So somebody's coming. One of the CISOs walking by was listening to this podcast and said, "I need to go talk to you." How would they find you?
Yes. They can find us on Think.Design.Cyber. Brian and our contacts are up there. We're also on LinkedIn. I answer direct messages myself, so I am happy to, to reply there also. So yeah, they can reach us everywhere through the podcast, through you, if they know you. Happy to, if you would want to connect us there too. Absolutely.
I love it, because of course we could do a part 2 and a part 3, but we have to stop at some point. So I said, hey.
I know. I love the stuff. Yeah. Once we started looking at it from a different perspective, it got really exciting.
Great content. So we're gonna take a pause at the end of part 2 here, and say if you want to talk a little bit more about that, there'll be more information in the show notes. So for now, that was another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest Prachee. Until next time, and if you need more information, you can go to williamreed.info. Thanks for joining another episode of the Smart IT Podcast, where we explore what's next for IT and disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk together. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments. And for more Smart IT wisdom, check out my website at williamreed.info.